This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, so this is the final part in the series of Tefillah. This is, as far as they tell me, this is part 6. So this is my final chance to try and drill in as much as I possibly can in the inyan of Tefillah. And as we've spoken about so many times, we daven 3 times a day. So, comes to many times during the year, especially as Shabbosim, Yom Tovim, Yom Kippur. Davening is an essential part of a Yiddishkeit of our lives. It's kedai to use the potential, to use the wonderful koyach. And often people complain, and I've heard this from many people of different ages, I just don't feel it. I come to shul, I daven, I'm from, I come to Shachris, Mincha, Mariv, I just don't feel it. And I can hear this from a 50-year-old man or an 18-year-old boy. It doesn't make a difference. And the answer, amongst many answers, and I'm not claiming to have the answer, but one of the answers has to be that we underestimate the koyach of tefillah. And we've spoken about it in the previous weeks, and I want to just reiterate again, because again this is the last one before we start Shovavim, Shiurim, and this is my chance to really drill in and try to home in on a couple of Yisodas, some great stories on the inyan of Tefillah. So give us a little bit of appreciation next time we walk into shul and open up a siddur, before we just bamble the words through. Well, actually, maybe give it a little bit of some thought before we do so, because Tefillah is something very chashuv. This morning, on my way to yeshiva, so I'm walking in the wonderful streets of Mea Shearim, and a fellow taps me on the shoulder. So I look around. It's a true story. And I see this Israeli, lovely-looking fellow, doesn't look the most Haredi that you can imagine, not in this area at least. And he says to me, in Hebrew, have you got a moment? I said, sure, no problem. So what he says, I just thought was a wonderful introduction to today's talk. And he says, it's so natural for us to walk into shul and have a connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom in davening and in learning. It's like normal for us. It's regular. It's like second nature. But he said to me, there are so many people out there that don't have that schus. There are so many people out there that don't have that schus of talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom, of having a relationship with Hashem. And they're lost. They're lost people. Because they have no one to turn to. And as we know, the saying goes, there's no atheist in a foxhole. So all of a sudden, when the going gets tough, then they start thinking, hey, what do I do? And go religious. I've had somebody once call me up who's completely not religious. He called me up from the hospital. His wife had just given birth to twin babies, and his wife was in a situation of sakonas nefashos, pikuach nefesh, and she unfortunately is not well. This was a number of years ago. This person was a completely not religious person. He called me up and said, do me a favor, say some tehillim, please. Because all of a sudden we realize we need that connection. And as this person told me today, it's a schus for us, and we don't even realize and appreciate that we come into the Beis HaMedrash, we come into shul, and we open up a siddur and we just talk to Hashem. But unfortunately, we don't realize the koyach of tefillah. We don't understand what tefillah is, and again, if there are a couple of things that I'm saying again, you'll excuse me, but these are things that we have to hear. The Mishnah, Perkei Avos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Beis tells us, Al shloishet dvarim ha'olam oimed, there are 3 things that the world stands. Al ha'Torah, al ha'avodah, says Rabbeinu Yoina. What does it mean? Al shloisha dvarim ha'olam oimed. So we understand, we translate it normally as these are the things that the world rests on. They sort of keep up the world. Says Rabbeinu Yoina in Yubshat. Says Rabbeinu Yoina, these are the 3 things why the world was created. And one of them is avodah. And as the Gemara tells us in Tainis, what is an avodah shevalev? It's tefillah. Our avodah, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. We don't have korbanos. We don't have kohanim. We can't do anything similar to that. But the only thing that we have, the closest that we get to a korban, is having this connection to tefillah. Our tefillah, every single time that we have the opportunity to daven, and again, it doesn't have to be a shachlis, mincha, and a mariv. It could be anytime you talk to Hashem, anytime you have a problem, anytime you need something, just talk to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Gemara in Brachos, Lamed Beis tells us the Ezet Dvarim, the things that need chizuk, the things that need strengthening, constant help, constant going over, is tefillah. Something so important. The Mor V'Shemesh and Parshas Kiseitze writes an amazing thing. He says, the Ikar Milchemes Hayetza. What is the one thing that the Yetzer Hara is trying to get you to do or stop you from doing? Right? So we can, I'm sure, give many, many examples. But says the Ma'or HaShemesh Chassidish HaSefer, he says the Iker Mulchemes HaYetza is for tefillah. He doesn't want you to daven. Of course, many people daven, but davening means understanding what the words mean, understanding that your tefillah counts, understanding that what you're saying is being listened to. The Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to have that connection, because that's a deep connection with the Rabbeinu Shel Olam, and he doesn't want you to have. The Medrash and Parshas Miketz, we just had it just last week. Ein lecha gedola min tefillah. There is nothing greater than tefillah. Again, why? The Gemara in Megillah, that Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, gedola tefillah mit Torah. That tefillah, this connection we have with Hashem, is more important, more chashuv than Torah. There's a Nefesh HaChaim, Chaim Volozhin, in Shar Daled. Amazing statement. It says the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Daled that we know. Many people know this part, for those that do, but most people don't know the second part. It says the Nefesh HaChaim, the world is existing upon Torah. If the entire world, nobody in the world will be learning Torah, the entire world would disintegrate the Tohu Vavohu, because that was the whole reason why the world was created for Torah. Bereishis and Bara Lekim, Bereishis B'Shel Torah, it's the Rashi at the beginning of the Parsha Bereishis. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, just like that if there be a moment in the world, Shimshon Pinkas brings this down so many times, just like if there be a moment in the world where no one would be learning Torah, the world would disintegrate. There wouldn't be a necessity to have the world. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, the same thing is with tefillah. Imagine a moment, as Shimshon Pinkas brings, that everybody has exactly what he has. Everybody has what he needs. Nobody needs anything. Everyone's happy with the tie. Everyone's happy with their car. Everyone's happy with their house, their job, their kids, everything. No one needs anything. Nobody davens. If there be a moment in the world that nobody is davening, the world, says the Nefesh HaChaim of Chaim Volozhin, was that the world would go and disintegrate the Tohu Vavohu, because the world relies and was created, as Rabbeinu Yonah just told us, for our avodah, which is tefillah. Tefillah brings that connection that we have with the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Chovos HaLevavos explains, how does it work? You know, you're davening for something, right? It's like a magic formula. So like, you get there, I need a new job. Great, God, I need a new job. Okay, when's it happening? How does it work? Like, what's the Indian tefillah that all of a sudden makes things happen? What is it? Some kind of magic potion? It's a magic formula. Says the Chovos HaLevavos and Cheshbon HaNefesh, a beautiful pshat. He says as follows. He says that the purpose of tefillah is not to change the Rebbeinu Shalom's mind. That's not what tefillah is. We don't daven to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu what to do. That's not what it's all about. We don't daven and say, God, come on, new job, better kids, more money, whatever it may be. That's not what we're doing. That's not the point. If that's the case, that it's not there to change the Rebbeinu Shalom's mind, so what is it? Says the Chovos HaLevavos, the pshat is because when we daven, it changes us. We become elevated. We become transformed into people that realize that relying on only one, the Rebbeinu Shalom, there's nothing else that we can rely on. When we realize that, and we come to the realization that there is no one in this world that can help us, right? The Chovos HaLevavos writes in Shar B'Tochen so many times, when a person has to realize you can't rely on human beings. Human beings are not running the world, the Rebbeinu Shalom is. When you have that recognition, when you acknowledge that thought, that you become elevated, you become high, you become better. When you become better, you deserve better things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give you more because you deserve it. Therefore, says the Chovos HaLevavos, the Chinuch says the same thing as well. We transform ourselves through davening. And that's how davening can help us. It's an amazing thing. There's an amazing Maisa that they said over one of the Rosh Yeshivas of the Meir. I think it was Rabbi Eliezer Yudel Zatzal, when he was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Meir, said over an unbelievable Maisa. It's an unbelievable Maisa. I would never have believed it if not he that he said it over, and Rabbi Edelstein also said it over, b'shem him. He said there was a Jew who was a Maisa. He used to sort of tell on other people. He was one of those guys that went to the government, went to the police and told everyone, that Jew, what he's doing with his taxes or his business, whatever he is. He used to just tell on people. He was a terrible Rasha. Terrible Rasha. All of Klal Yisrael hated him. He caused a tremendous tzoros for Klal Yisrael. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do. So the Gedolim came up with a psak. What are we going to do with this guy? What are we going to do? He's causing tzoros for Klal Yisrael. He's causing terrible tzoros for all the people in the community. So they decided that what they're going to do is as follows. They're going to put him up as the chazan. And in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, so this is a true Maisa, in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, the whole community, everyone from the shul is going to come over, they're going to pick him up by force, tie him up, and throw him into the local river and drown him. Maisa. That was the psak that they did. Right? They held it was chayiv misa. Whatever the situation was, we're not going into the shaila right now. That's what they did. Kachav. That's exactly what they did. They came over, they tied him up, and they threw him into the river. End of Maisa. We got rid of him. Wonderful. A few days later, he came to one of the Rabbonim in a dream. Came to one of the Rabbonim who paskin the shaila in a dream. He said, I want to tell you something. I'm up in Shemayim now, and you paskin correctly. You're right. I was chayiv misa. I was taka chayiv misa. You paskin correctly. I wasn't fit to be on this world. But I had just one problem. Why didn't you at least let me finish Manasseh? At least you could have let me finish the words. Shema koleinu tekabel shofar rifa'enu. You could have let me finish. You don't realize in Shemayim what every one of those words mean. That's what you should have let me miss. That was what the koyach of tefillah is, and he understood that from over there. There's a Gemara, Baba Basra, Chav Kuf Chav Gimel Amar Aleph. The Gemara tells us as follows. The Gemara says that people said that there were two sons that Rivka had, and two daughters that Lavan had. The older to the older, and the younger to the younger. Right? Says the Medrash Tanchuma. Says that at that moment that Rivka and had Yaakov and Esav, at that moment, says the Medrash, Lavan also had two girls called Leah and Rachel. And at that moment, says the Medrash, they sent letters one to the other. Okay, great. The shidduch is set. Like the Mishnah in Kedushin, right? Even before that stage. The shidduch is set. We're going to make Esav with Leah and Yaakov with Rachel. Moshe Medrash, they already paskin, they already made the Kedushin. They already drank halachayim. And what happened? Says the Medrash, because we know, as the Torah tells us, that her eyes were soft. Why? From all the crying that she did. Her tefillah was able to change and transform all of that. And as we know, she never got to marry Esav. Why? Because she davened. The koyach of tefillah that she had is an unbelievable koyach of tefillah. Listen to the lashon of a Rambam. There's a Rambam in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim Perik Zayin, where the Rambam says as follows. What happens if a poor man comes up to you, he needs money. He's got no money for a shidduch, his daughter got married, he's looking for money, or he's got no money to put on the food on the table for Shabbos. He needs a lot of money. He's got no clothing, his kids, whatever it may be. So what do? Paskins the Rambam Halacha L'Maaseh, before Rambam Matnas Aniyim Perik Zayin. The Rambam says you have an obligation, you have a chiyuv, to give him whatever he needs. Whatever it is. However much money it is, you have the obligation. He's coming to you and you only. You have to give him everything. As I pass the Rambam. Continues the Rambam. What happens if you have a poor man that's going from door to door? He's not only coming to you. He's going to the whole street. He's going to the whole neighborhood. He also comes to your door. Says the Rambam, you don't have to give him a ton of muruba. You don't have to give him a huge amount. Give him something small. Don't turn him empty-handed. Make sure he doesn't leave your house with something. 1 second. So on one hand, the Rambam tells me, if someone comes to you and says, I've got a huge expensive for a chasana and a this and a that, you're going to give him everything he needs. The other one, who's only that's going from door to door, give him something small. What's the difference? Says Rav Shimshon Pinkus, an unbelievable pshat in the Rambam. Says Rav Shimshon Pinkus, the pshat is, and only that comes knocking on the door, you have to give him something small. It's exactly the same thing with tefillah. The same thing as with tefillah is that as follows, which is what? Says Rosh Hashanah, a person has a Torah, a person needs something terrible, and he runs to a gemach, and he runs to someone to help him, and he runs to this one, to this one, to this one, to this one, and he says, I probably should also ask God as well. I'll leave something to God, right? So he also davens. Says the Rambam, he's going from door to door to door. Say, doesn't give him something big, give him something small. Make sure he doesn't leave empty-handed. If you're going to Parnasa, to a new job, to a boss, to a meeting, and also you'll remember God to also help you, then God will say, no problem, I'll give you something small. I'll make sure you're not leaving empty-handed. But if you come to the Rebbeinu Shalom and say you're the only one, there's nobody else. Of course I need to do my ishtadlus, of course I need to ask my boss, I need to work harder, whatever it is, I have to do things that I have to do. Ishtadlus is very important. Chassidus Lubavitch says it many, many times. But if you realize that it's all from the Rebbeinu Shalom, and when you turn to Hashem, you say, Hashem, you're the only one that can help me, then the Rambam says, you'll get everything. Because it's exactly the same thing like tzedakah, which is a beautiful pshat in the Rambam, as the Rosh Hashanah Pinkus says. An amazing, amazing, amazing thing. The problem is we don't have kavanah. We don't have kavanah. Somebody once came to a Gadol and said, how do I get all these machshavas out of my head? I'm busy thinking of this and I'm busy thinking of that. I've got a million things that I need to do. I haven't got so much concentration to block it all out. So the Gadol said, I'll give you a marshal. So the king commanded someone to cross a very, very narrow bridge. There was only place for one person to stand. If he doesn't concentrate properly, he will fall off, and who knows what will happen afterwards. Right? Can you ask the person when he comes to the other end of the bridge, tell me, were you thinking of the sports? Were you thinking of what was for lunch here? Are you crazy? I didn't have time to think about everything else. I was only thinking of how to get past this bridge to the end safe. Said this Gadol is the same thing. If we really came to Tefillah and realized that the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world, wants to give us and can give us everything that we possibly want, then yes, maybe we'll have a little bit more concentration like walking over that bridge. I'll tell you two more things. Unbelievable. The Berditchever, Reb Levi Yitzchak, was one time in shul and he watched a guy sort of murmuring through davening. You probably never saw such a thing, but there are people that sort of just murmur through the davening. So he watches, the Berditchever Rebbe, he watches this person just murmuring through davening. I've got to do something about it. So the Berditchever goes over to the guy and he goes over to him and says, so the guy says, Rebbe, I don't understand what you're saying. So he says, so he says, Rebbe, I'm really sorry. I'm so embarrassed, but I don't understand what the Rebbe is saying. So he says, so why do you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands what you're saying when you go to him? It doesn't work that way. So as he was saying that, an older man came over to him and said, Rebbe, what you're saying is very nice when one man talks to another man. But when a young child, a baby, talks, the mother always understands. Because the mother understands that our child is hungry, something is hurting. To the Rebbeinu Shalom, we're a child. HaKadosh Baruch Hu always understands what we say because HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us and created us. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the Berditchever, was so excited, he went over to the man and he hugged him and he said, the 70 years that you spent in this world was justified by just finding favor and merit for this young man, and he gave him a bracha. Amazing Maisa. Rabbi Shalom Shadron, when he said over the Maisa, Shalom Shalom used to say over this Maisa, when he said over this Maisa, he said, yeah, that's very, very cute, very, very nice. But when a 20-year-old talks like a little baby, then that's embarrassing. We have to realize that every word that's in the Siddur is packed with dynamite. It's automatic dynamite. You just need to say it. The Anshe Knesset HaGedolah put in so much koicha, so much power into every word of the tefillah that just saying it with a little bit of concentration and understanding who's listening can have a tremendous effect. Let me just end with two last things. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz in Sichas Musa writes, he says that just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu lifted us from the 49th level of impurity when we were in Mitzrayim and elevated us to the 49th level of holiness at Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can assist and wants to assist every single one of us, but there's one condition. We have to open up our mouths. We have to ask. The more we open and the wider we open, the more we're going to get. Rav Shimshon Pincus in his Sichas in Elul brings, on page 33, he brings over there a very interesting moshel. He says, imagine if you have a hospital and the main doctor said, listen, I'm giving instructions to all the people through the night. Most of the patients are all sleeping. If anyone wakes up, call this doctor. If 2 or 3 or 4 more people wake up, call more doctors. Don't be worried that whatever time of night it is, however many doctors you have to call, we're on standby. We're ready to come whenever you're ready. So he said, sure, no problem. At one point during the night, someone woke up, so the doctor attended to him, someone else woke up, so he ran to him, the third person woke up, he ran to him, and he was running through the night from one into the other, and unfortunately, he didn't manage to get to everybody at the time that they needed, and one person died. And the next morning when they were reviewing the situation, they said, to the doctor, well, what's the matter? Why didn't you call? He said, I didn't want to call. He said, but you fool! I told you the more people you're not going to be able to cope, you're going to have to call for help. If you don't call for help, then look what happens. Sister Shimshon Pincus, it's the same thing for us. Because Baruch Hu wants to give us so much, but you just have to ask. The tefillah is there, it's all ready. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give us absolutely everything. You just need to ask. And let me just end, really, with one last story. A true Maisa that happened in England a number of years ago. A businessman got a dreaded phone call, the phone call that he dreaded from the old age home, from the nursing home, where his old mother was lying. And the administrator, the secretary at the nursing home said, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Smith, terribly sorry, but unfortunately I have to tell you the news that your mother didn't make it through the night. She was a 92-year-old woman, so it wasn't a shocking news to him, but it was his mother. And he put down the phone, he made a Baruch Dayan or MS, and he started crying. It was his mother at the end of the day. He lived in a different city, called back the office, and he said, do me a favor. There's no way I'm going to be able to get there in time. It's not covered at Mace. I want to make sure she gets buried as soon as possible. Try to contact the Chevra Kadisha, whatever it costs, I'm paying for it, and give her the best levaya and best funeral that you possibly can. They said, sure, no problem. That's what they did. A couple of days later, he gets a phone call. He wasn't in Shiva, whatever. I'm going through the whole story right now, why he wasn't in Shiva. A couple of days later, he gets a phone call from his mother. He says, excuse me, is something wrong over here? His mother said, yeah, what's the matter? Is something okay? Why are you so surprised to hear my voice? He said, but I thought you were somewhere else right now. So she's like, what are you talking about? So he calls back the administrative officer and says, what are you doing? You told me my mother. So the woman on the end of the phone said, oh no, I made a terrible, terrible mistake. It wasn't your mother, it was her roommate. The other woman in the room was Nifta, and I called you by mistake, which means she forgot to call the son of the woman that was actually Nifta. So you can imagine the pain and sound, embarrassment of calling the son a few days after this woman's already been buried. But what choice did she have? So she calls up, and she gets a completely different reaction. This guy's like, oh good, I was waiting for this. Make sure you cremate her as soon as possible. She's like, whoa, what happened over here? So she's like, I'm really sorry to tell you, but unfortunately, we kind of buried her 3 days ago. Right? So he's like, what? She won! I can't believe it! So the secretary said, I don't understand. Can you explain to me what's going on over here? He said, I'll tell you. My mother was a very religious person. I myself left the religion. I wasn't interested in this religion. And I left it, and my mother was so upset. She used to daven every single day that I'll be chayzer b'tshuva and come back to religion and everything like that. But obviously I wasn't interested. And I used to try to spite her, and I was upset with her. So I used to tell her, Ma, don't worry. When you leave this world, I'm going to cremate you. I'm going to make sure. And it bothered her to no end and intensified her tefillah every single day that she davened. She davened to make sure that her son didn't have it his way, and she was not cremated, and she was buried. Look what the koyach of tefillah can do. It could cause a mistake like that to make sure that she got the kavura, the burial that she needed. Why? Because she opened her mouth and she asked. That's all the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from us. Next time we open up a siddur, next time you need something, doesn't have to be in a Shachris Mincha and Ma'ariv form, talk to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Have the relationship, and when you have that, the Rebbeinu Shalom will give us all a lot of siyata d'shmaya. Have a wonderful day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.